In progress.
Okay, friends, one last thought. The Gemara tells us that at the end of the life of Rabbi Akiva, when they were taking him out to rake his flesh with combs of steel, he was being mekabel o malchus shamayim, and his talmidim said, Rebbi, ad kan, even at a moment like this. Rabbi Akiva said, Kol yamai hayisi mitztara pasuk zeh, hayamarich be'echad, ad sheyatzasa nishmasai be'echad. His soul departed be'echad. His soul departed with the word echad. You know, it's very interesting. The Ion Yaakov in Masechta Brachos, Daf Samach Aleph on Beis says, why did Rabbi Akiva suffer this fate? He said because Rabbi Akiva made a mistake, says the Ion Yaakov. Rabbi Akiva said, the famous Gemara in Psachim, there was a debate on Daf Chavez Amud Beis. The Torah tells us, as Hashem leikecha tira, you need to fear Hashem. And Ben Petura was of the opinion, Shimon HaAmsuni was of the opinion, and Nehemiah HaAmsuni, that every S in the Torah has meaning, but they could not figure out what could possibly be the meaning of the word S. In Es Hashem leikecha tira, who else could you fear other than Hashem? And the Gemara says until Rabbi Akiva came along and he said, well, what's the issue? S comes the rabbis Talmidei Chachamim. That there's an entity in this world that we have to have reverence for besides HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And that is the entity of Talmidei Chachamim. So Rabbi Akiva innovated, Rabbi Akiva was Mechadesh, that aside from the Rebbeinu Shalom, there's a reverence that we have to have for Talmidei Chachamim. Says the Ion Yaakov, Rabbi Akiva made a mistake by offering this drasha. How could you compare a Talmid Chacham to the Achdus of HaKadosh Baruch Hu? So therefore, Rabbi Akiva was punished. Rabbi Akiva was punished. By the way, the Ion Yaakov in Masechta Sanhedrin repeats this notion. The Gemara says on Daf Lamed Chesam Beis, Amar Reish Lakish, Zeh Sefer Toldos Adam, that Hashem showed every generation, Hashem showed Adam, the leaders of the generation, the wise men of the generation, and when Adam got to the door of Rabbi Akiva, Adam rejoiced in the Torah of Rabbi Akiva. But then Adam was saddened by his death. Says the Ion Yaakov, Adam was joyous about the Torah of Rabbi Akiva, because the Torah of Rabbi Akiva allowed a person to have ambition, l'damois l'elyon, to be mamish similar to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. But he was saddened by his death. Why was he saddened by his death? Says Ion Yaakov, in his opinion, Rabbi Akiva in fact died because he was mistaken in making this drasha. How could you compare anyone to HaKadosh Baruch Hu? So in two places, the Ion Yaakov was Rabbi Yaakov Reisher, the great Posek, the author of the Shvus Yaakov, the Choik Yaakov. In two places, he says there's a criticism on Rabbi Akiva for offering this drasha as Hashem leikecha l'rabbis Talmidei Chachamim. But some Achronim, they challenge the Ion Yaakov. How could you say that a drasha in the Gemara is not correct? The Yalkut HaGershuni asks, Ube'ena yipla ma'oid loymar, a Rabbi Akiva sheshagag b'zeh. Could you say Rabbi Akiva made a mistake? And furthermore, if Rabbi Akiva made a mistake, then the halacha should not be like Rabbi Akiva. Then the halacha should be that there is no asay in honoring Talmidei Chachamim. And yet throughout Shas maintains that honoring Talmidei Chachamim is an asay. If you look in the Gemara in Shavuos and Daf Lamed Amid Beis, where the Gemara says Hayaseh v'Hayaseh, the asay of Imdu against the asay of Es Hashem leikecha tira l'rabbis Talmidei Chachamim, and the Gemara says asay dekava Torah adif. What do you mean? Rabbi Akiva made a mistake to compare Talmidei Chachamim with Hashem, and therefore it's generally assumed that no. Not only was Rabbi Akiva not punished for making such a drasha, But this drasha is reality of the Torah. That the Torah teaches us, and this is the innovation of Rabbi Akiva, that there's a certain esteem that the genuine Talmidei Chachamim of Klal Yisrael have to have in our eyes, and that is their hushva l'makayim. You know, in this week's Parsha, we know there's an idea Rabbeinu Bechaye brings on the final pasuk of the Parsha, V'yatem alu l'shalayim al avichem. There's an idea that the brothers, for selling Yosef, had to come back to this world another time, and they were punished quite severely in the guise of the Asara Haruge Malchus. It's a well-known idea. It's a focus of the Eila Ezkara in the Arzei Halavanon that we say on Tisha B'Av, and the Eila Ezkara that we say on Yom Kippur. There's an idea that the Asara Haruge Malchus were a kapara for the sale of Yosef. And there's a lot of discussion in the more mystical works of which one of the Asara Haruge Malchus was corresponded to which one of the Shvatim. And there's a lot of talk about Rabbi Akiva. Because the question is, really there are only 9 brothers involved in selling Yosef. Yosef wasn't involved in selling Yosef. And what about Ruvain wasn't there? And Binyamin wasn't there. So there's only 9. So comes Rav Shamshin of Ashtrapoli, and Rav Shamshin of Ashtrapoli says amazingly that in fact the 10th one of the Shvatim is not one of the Shvatim, but it's God Himself. The Ribbon Shalom Himself was responsible in part for the Chet of Mechiras Yosef because they were Meshatef. They joined in, whatever this means, they joined in HaKadosh Baruch Hu in the sale of Yosef. So now the question is, who corresponds to HaKadosh Baruch Hu? Says Rav Shamshin of Ashtrapol, again, this is not like the Eon Yaakov. You know who corresponds to HaKadosh Baruch Hu? Corresponds to HaKadosh Baruch Hu is none other than Rabbi Akiva. Why does Rabbi Akiva correspond to HaKadosh Baruch Hu? Because Rabbi Akiva was the one who darshaned as Hashem Alekecha Tira l'Rabbi Talmidei Chachamim. So Rabbi Akiva was the one who created the reality that a Talmid Chacham literally, to some extent, in some semblance, there's a commonality with the Talmid Chacham and HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Therefore Rabbi Akiva is the suitable corresponding entity to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. These are the words of Rav Shamshin of Ashtrapol. And he says, this is the meaning of the pasuk. We know that Rabbi Akiva was a shepherd. So the pasuk says, V'cho masar bakar v'tzayin. If you want to know why did Rabbi Akiva, the shepherd, die, the answer is, you know why? Kol asher yavoid. Because everyone who dies and passes on from the world, they were min asar ruge malchus, tachas hashavet. Each one of the asar haruge malchus tachas hashavet. So it comes out that there were 9 shvatim. But why did the 10th die? If there are only 9 shvatim involved in the mechira, the answer is Hoasiri, the 10th one. He is Yia Kodesh. He was in the place of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Now, what's interesting to me is that Rabbi Akiva didn't always have this respect for Talmidei Chachamim. Not only did Rabbi Akiva not always understand the greatness of Talmidei Chacham, not only were Talmidei Chacham not always on such a high pedestal to Rabbi Akiva, but Rabbi Akiva says, you know, in his previous life, before when he was in Am Haaretz, Kisha Yisi Am Haaretz, HaYisi Omer, he would say, Mi yiten li Talmid Chacham, va'anashchenu kechamar, who could give me a Talmid Chacham, and I'll bite him like a donkey. Very interesting. So Rabbi Akiva didn't always have this respect for Talmidei Chachamim. So how is it that Rabbi Akiva started off with, so to speak, a vulnerability and a weakness specifically in this area, in the area of appreciating Talmidei Chachamim, And he catapulted himself and he propelled himself to such a high level that not only did he overcome his challenge, he took his handicap and he made it his strength. There's no one in the history of the world who appreciated Talmidei Chachamim as great as Rabbi Akiva. In fact, if I could segue for a moment, this seems to be at odds with the well-known teaching that the Shlach HaKadosh brings down, that Rabbi Akiva was not in place of Hashem, but rather Rabbi Akiva was in place of Yosef, and Yosef needed kapara because he sort of, in a way, incited the jealousy of his brother, so he had a certain culpability in the Mechiras Yosef. So is that a stira? Is Rabbi Akiva in the place of Yosef? By the way, the Shlosh says that that's why he's called Akiva ben Yosef. It's not that his father's name necessarily was Yosef, but it's a remez to the idea that he is in place of Yosef HaTzadik, or is Rabbi Akiva in the place of Hashem? So the Shlach HaKadosh writes that it's not a contradiction. Rabbi Akiva was both, and that's because Yosef, in his role as tzaddik is the merkava to the Shechina, and as a merkava to the Shechina, Rabbi Akiva was able to be simultaneously in lieu of Yosef, but Yosef is the tzaddik, he's the chariot of the Shechina, so he's both in place of Yosef, and he's in the place of the Shechina. By the way, this I can't help but think, because Yosef HaTzadik says in this week's parsha, Zoi sasu v'chyu esho Elokim ani yarei. Esho Elokim ani yarei. It's the very same words that Rabbi Akiva darshaned. Es Hashem Elokecha tira l'Rabbi Samech Chachamim. It's like Yosef is saying, you need to know who I am. Yosef's giving a little clue. You want to know who I am? Es Hashem ani yarei l'Rabbi Talmidei Chachamim. So, one thing that's important to recognize, as the Chazon Ish teaches us, when Chazal look to include something besides HaKadosh Baruch Hu in this world, meaning who is that personality who should be on the highest pedestal in our life, Chazal don't say it's the tzaddik, Chazal don't say it's the mekubal, Chazal don't say it's the Baal Chesed, Chazal don't say it's the many great personalities grace the Jewish people. But of all those great personalities, the one should be held in the highest esteem in our eyes is the Talmid Chacham. But besides that, I think it's worthwhile to think how Rabbi Akiva took a weakness in his life and he transformed it into his greatest strength. And that's a very inspiring limud. Very often there are things in our life we say, I'm not really good at that. That's not my strong point. Or, I get along with most people, but I can't really get along with so-and-so. And I think what Rabbi Akiva did should give us the motivation and it should challenge us that there are things in our life where if we're not successful at them, we don't have to throw in the towel. But moreover, we can take them and transform them and make them the greatest strength we have in our life. Rabbi Akiva's weak point was the esteem in which he held Talmidei Chachamim. But he took it, and he worked on it, and he studied it, and he's ma'ayin into it. And he worked and he worked and he worked until he catapulted himself from being on the level of Miyiten li Talmid Chacham anashchenu kechamar to be able to equate to darshan as Hashem l'Rabbi Samech Chachamim, and ultimately, Reb Shan Shapoli says that's Yatzasa Nishmasai Be'echad, that he was Zoicha, that his soul departed in lieu of HaKadosh Baruch Hu himself. And we might not be able to reach the lofty levels of Rabbi Akiva, but we should use it as a motivation and inspiration that there may be things in our life that we find challenging, and we should challenge ourselves not only to work on them, not only to try to overcome them, but challenge yourself that maybe transform that into something that could be your greatest strength. Rabbi Isai, have a wonderful Shabbos. Bracha v'atzlacha.
Recording stopped.
Good Shabbos, everyone.